Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. Once again, my co-host Judy Boxner and I have breaking news, and that, of course, is the reading recovery lawsuit. But now we're going to look at it from a legal point of view, and we are so lucky to have John McGrath on with us. Yay, John. And John McGrath is a New York attorney representing parents and their children in meetings of school district committees on special education and Section 504. He also represents them in special education and Section 504 due process hearings and appeals. He was a member of the Mineola School Board from 1997 to 2012. And we are so happy to have John with us. He read the press release on the reading recovery lawsuit. And my first question, John, is, do they have a case? What do you think of this? Do they have a case?
I don't think they have a case, and the reason for it is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an expert on Ohio law, but some aspects of law in Ohio are going to be similar to what we have here. And when New York City decided to put the what was then called the Board of Education under the mayor's office, it passed constitutional and statutory muster, and the job that used to be the Board of Educations in New York City became now the mayor's job. Now there was still a board of, there was still now it's called the Department of Education. So I'm assuming, and I don't like to assume too much, but I'm assuming Ohio's got something similar, and that their constitution is going to probably be very similar to New York's, and it's unlikely that it's going to be able, that Reading Recovery Council of North America is going to be able to stop it. Their main argument in their case is that Governor DeWine in Ohio put language into a budget bill that basically made other forms of reading instruction, I hate to use the word illegal. He just said you couldn't do it. And from a budget perspective, he funneled money into, in fact, hold on, I have the numbers.
Well, John is getting, you found it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So
go ahead.
he put in his budget, he put 86 million for educator professional development, 64 million for curriculum instructional materials, and 18 million for literacy coaches. So that's a huge amount of money. And that's all for the purpose of converting over to science of reading. And he first came up with it during his State of the Union, State of the State address in January, put it in his budget. It survived. It had some changes. It survived. And then it became law in July when he signed the budget. The Reading Recovery organization stands to lose a lot of money, so that's why they're suing.
That's the bottom line. It's all about money. I mean, all of this is about money. But what you said is interesting because, yes, in fact, that's what did happen in New York, where there was this transfer of power. And I would imagine that can happen in Ohio. And he would have every right to make those decisions. But according to this press release, it seems as though they are saying that there's not enough evidence that there is really a science of reading. So, Judy, you read the press release, and you were a reading recovery teacher, and they seem to say that basically uh, science of reading lacks peer-reviewed studies and is contested by many literacy experts. So they're kind of taking a different stand here, saying that, yeah, the science of reading doesn't really have much science behind it. Any thoughts about that? And are you used to reading recovery leaders kind of taking this type of position?
So this is historical. And I know that, in general, reading is shifting. My shift started 7 years ago. I was in reading recovery back in 2013 for 4 years. The program worked for some of my students, although studies are now finding that many of those students didn't do as well in the long term. And for some of my students, they didn't do very well at all. And I've talked about it on episode after episode after episode after episode. They didn't do really well at all. Mm-hmm. And they did not become readers. And, it was nice that they had personalized attention for 20 weeks, but they didn't get very far. Mm-hmm. And the reason they didn't get very far is because I think the program had fundamental flaws that were not recognized. And I think that, the science is not really new. It's new for me in the sense that it's been my life now for the last 7 years. So it's not that new for me either. But there's been so much extensive research showing how the brain works and showing that we missed the boat on decoding. To blatantly ignore the research and the science and say no because of personal beliefs rather than following the research, I think is a critical mistake. I think that, as all this new research poured in, that was a great opportunity to say, these are the shifts we're making. We're going to incorporate decodable text for our early readers who may need that. We're going to, use Acadians or other types of screeners to check their phonemic awareness, their oral reading fluency, their phoneme segmentation fluency. I think they really missed the boat.
So Judy, I want to just stop you. You said a lot of interesting things. Before you got on, John got on with me a few minutes earlier than when you popped on, and he started to talk about the brain science. Right. And so what we know about how the brain works. So John, from what Judy said, and she's right, there's so much we know that we knew then and we know now about the science and how the brain works. How can this be disputed? What do you think, John? What are some of your thoughts about this?
Okay, so, well, as Judy said, there's a lot of research over the last 40 years in neuroscience that has uncovered the way students learn how to read, people learn how to read, and and that over that period of time, we've also got the way we've been doing it, which really is very subjective, and it's not very science-based. In fact, whether it's reading recovery or Fountas and Pinnell, most neuroscience scientists are going to say that that's not the way children learn how to read.
But they said in this press release that they do have science behind it, and that they do have the research to support it. And basically science of reading proponents kind of like, they really don't have enough, evidence behind what they say. That's kind of saying something different.
Well, even if you want to discount neuroscience, which I don't think anybody really does. Certainly the governor of Ohio doesn't want to discount that. Even if you put that to the side, whatever their experts are going to show or going to give us still has to explain why 40% of students can't read in this country. And they're not going to be able to do that. I I saw another piece as I was doing my research, to come on today. There was somebody named Miss Ray who said you should not use Fountas and Pinnell to refer students to the Committee on Special Education. You shouldn't use that. It's not, it's subjective. It's not going to give you a good way of knowing whether or not how the student's performing and what needs to be done in order to get them past their inability to read. So now I don't think you can discount neuroscience, and you certainly can't discount at least 20 years since No Child Left Behind of failure.
Exactly.
And it was supposed to, No Child Left Behind was supposed to fix it by identifying the areas of deficit. And of course, it was resisted. And school districts, look, I deal with this all the time. School districts do not like statistics, and because the statistics don't support them. If you look at any particular school district, now look, I practice on Long Island, and if you look at any particular school district, now there's going to be school districts, high wealth school districts that are going to be able to overcome either by genuinely providing instruction to students or some sort of chicanery, but they're going to provide their numbers are going to look different. But if you look at the average the scores of the average school districts on Long Island, they're not good. They're not good in reading or math. A lot of students do not know how to read and do not know how to have skills in mathematics, age appropriate skills. So they can say that the science of reading doesn't have any research to back it up. I don't think that's right, because the research in neuroscience has supported how students learn how to read, and that's what the science of reading is trying to do. So I don't think the reading recovery organization is going to be successful if they go that route. They're really trying to just say the legislature doesn't have the power to do this. It's legal / political, and I'm sure. And did I mention that Gay Sue Pinnell is also on the board of Reading Recovery? I was a little surprised when I saw that, but not surprised at the same time.
Not at all.
Because they stand to lose. Fountas and Pinnell stands to lose a lot of money. Reading Recovery stands to lose a lot of money. And look, I think Lucy Calkins went down, screaming.
We drink to Lucy. You just mentioned the magic name. Drink up, John.
I'll drink to that.
John, have you heard that name? A lot of the cases that you had to,
Sure, they smack me with it all the time. Columbia, Lucy Calkins. How do you get past that? And of course, it's hard to get past that if they're considered the experts. So even if my kid's performance is in the tank, Lucy Calkins, Columbia. So I think Columbia made the right move, cut their losses. And
it took kind of long, though, don't you think?
It took way too long. And don't get me wrong. The IDEA doesn't support educational malpractice, but this is educational malpractice on steroids.
You better believe it.
Wait, where's that like button that we were supposed to have?
The bingo button? Yeah. I don't have it yet.
Their happy music plays. No, that's very interesting. And I think it's interesting, John, that you mentioned Fountas and Pinnell and how it related to reading recovery and balanced literacy and so forth. I think they kind of, that program kind of got off the hook easy. Nobody's been thinking about that program because they actually do have a curriculum that's in schools too, which is, still around in a lot of places in especially in the suburbs. But my main question is, so this is more than just about like reading recovery, right? It's basically about changing laws in terms of what can be, what's happening in our classrooms. Has something like this happened historically in legal terms before? Is this common? Because I know a lot of states right now, not just Ohio, are actually implementing laws to,
Well, actually, there's
outlaw miscue analysis and different things like that. So what's going on in terms of like the legal front in general, in terms of like all these things?
There are three states, three other states that did it. Virginia's one. Let me just see if I can find it.
So Virginia,
Louisiana, Arkansas, and Virginia have laws that ban curriculum that includes 3Qing. And you're
So
going
that
to
means it stood in the case in the eye of the court. This is
well, those states have just banned it. There's
Yeah.
nothing. I don't have any information on whether those laws are being challenged. But I would expect that you're going to see more challenges because of the money.
right.
And according to one piece I read, the reason for the lawsuit is that Reading Recovery makes the bulk of their money on memberships. So school districts have to become a member of Reading Recovery. It's a nonprofit organization.
RRCNA, I think. RRCNA.
Right. So they have to. So they purchase a membership for God knows how much money, and then because of this law, they're losing members in Ohio, because why would you need to be affiliated with Reading Recovery any longer since you can't use their materials? So it's only natural. And once that starts happening in other states, you're going to see other pushback. And it's interesting. I don't know the statistics for Ohio in terms of reading, but for them to do something like this against their own educational establishment, the reading results have to be horrendous. Look, we already know 40% of students in the whole country aren't able to read at grade level. So
Probably more.
it probably is more because these numbers get fudged too. They're not always easy if it's only based on state tests, and the state tests are given appropriately. Then it's harder to fudge. But so for instance, many districts use in district tests like NWEA or there's another one with an astronomical name to it. Well, anyway, NWEA is, and they give that 3 times a year, once in September, once in the middle of the year, and once at the end of the year, to measure the student's progress. And they're measured against every other student in that particular school district, which is good. I think that's a good thing to do if it's done right, So, but the thing that I found in my practice is that they would come with Fountas and Pinnell and say, okay, but the students at this level, and this is, and they use terms like instructional or what's the higher level after instructional? I'm blanking.
They're independent?
Independent, yes. So so they would throw out, they say, the kids at this started in September at this level, and say we're having an issue at the hearing in July. So the kids started at this level in September, and in June ended at this level, Fountas and Pinnell levels. And I say, well, how do you explain, that the students
Independent level,
performing at the 16th percentile on an objective test, Woodcock Johnson or Wyatt? How do you explain that? And did you do that in the beginning? And look, sometimes they'll substitute NWEA testing instead. So it's a battle between objective testing and then the subjective results that can be manipulated by teachers or principals or on their own. And I'm not saying any particular district's doing that. I'm just saying it could be more easily manipulated than an objective test.
Sure, because
So a state,
it is subjective. It is subjective. So, John, basically, what you're saying is, based on our conversation, Lucy Calkins probably did the wrong thing. Here's to Lucy, by kind of saying, "Yeah, I had it wrong, right? I had it wrong." But Fountas and Pinnell, they doubled down. They dug their heels in. They doubled down, and they were like, they never admitted that they did anything wrong. And now they have these lawsuits going with reading recovery. It seems to me that maybe Lucy regrets ever saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to come up with some changes," because that was admitting that maybe she didn't have it right.
well, you know what? Maybe she does, but I would think that when it comes right down to it, if I had to look at my crystal ball tonight, I would probably see Lucy coming out of this somewhat whole at the end of the day because she did bail out, and
Oh,
Fontes
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
and Fontes and Pinnell getting sucked into the quicksand because they're fighting it. They could have done what Lucy did. All right, let's just revamp everything and go with it. And they chose to have a legal fight about it. And that's really not going to help kids in Ohio or anywhere else for that matter.
John, how long could a case like this be in the courtroom?
Well, you got to start with an administrative hearing. So, hearings take 4 or 5 days, maybe 6 or 7, depending on the number of witnesses. Now, in the regular courts, you do it consecutive days. In administrative hearings, it's according to everybody's schedule. So it could be months and months before a case concludes. And then each side has the right to appeal. And that goes to the state review officer, and then he makes a decision. And then you get to court. So the good thing about the administrative appeal process is that if the state review officer in New York, say, Ohio may have it. Some states go directly to court after the due process hearing. Other states have that intermediate appeal to a state review officer, like we do. And if the state review officer rules in favor of the parent, the district's going to lose their case in court because the courts will not substitute their judgment for the state education department's judgment. And that's the legal standard that most courts follow. So if flip it around, if the state review officer rules in favor of the district, the parent's probably going to lose because the courts, again, they won't do it unless the state review officer's decision has no rationale to it, and is not as complete as it could be. Then the court will substitute its own judgment for the state review officers. But it's very hard, and actually the state review officer is issuing pretty good decisions in terms of their depth and the amount of information in those decisions. So they hired a bunch of people who are professionals, and they write they write legally good decisions. Even if I disagree with it, they look pretty good.
John, I'm going to jump in here. You mentioned parents, and I like to go in that direction. So now you have Reading Recovery with their lawsuit. Do parents have a lawsuit? Do they?
Oh, that's a good faith.
Think about that. Do parents right now, do they have a lawsuit against any of these gurus that were kind of leading the charge for so many years? Fountas, Pinnell, anybody in leadership with Reading Recovery. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, in terms of, I think parents have a better shot with Calkins and Columbia. I don't know what kind of money Reading Recovery has. When I was on their website earlier, there's a little donation button there, so they're asking for donations, in addition to whatever money they're getting for promoting their program. But I think that that Reading Recovery is just barking up the wrong tree here. And parents might have, parents in Ohio certainly, and in any other location where they're using Reading Recovery's stuff, that parents they might have some ability to do something about that. There's statute of limitations that could prevent it. But again, there's nothing stopping the government, just like they did with the abuse cases in New York. There's nothing from stopping the government from extending the statute of limitations. And you know what? In this particular situation, I don't think that's a terrible idea, because the misery these children went through, and these are kids who have, all the kids that I represent have average to high cognitive abilities, but they can't read. So that's going to impact their higher level math, as well as reading. So it limits their choices. New York State recently did an overhaul of its graduation requirements. I think they did that to acknowledge that the way they were teaching was not was discriminating against disabled students, and that they had to resolve that by making it easier for them to graduate. But that's the wrong focus. You don't make it
Exactly.
you don't make it easier to graduate. You teach them how to read, and you provide them with compensatory services that allows that to happen, so that they can go to somebody like you and learn how to read.
That's right. That's right. And it's funny because that doesn't just happen with that. I know, like, the state exam for third graders no longer had an extended response because of COVID.
Well, COVID solved
But
a lot
kids
of
still need to know how to write. When is it going to stop? When are we going to realize that what we did was wrong, and that kids need a structured approach to literacy, because they can do it? I think that the mindset of they can't do it is the wrong approach. They can do it with the right instruction. And I'm hoping that, things just go in a positive direction. I think it's going in a good direction. So basically, John, explain to me that this is not the first time something like this has happened, right? Have there been other cases where curriculum has been written into laws and so forth, or like research and so forth?
Not usually. Really?
Usually
that's going to be the State Department of Education, whatever state you're talking about. And they're going to put together, putting together a curriculum involves a lot of people. Sometimes it can come from the outside, or that gets developed in-house. So look, Lucy Calkins, in however many years ago,
And Lucy.
so she hawked her thing and convinced people to do it, and they did it for a while, and a long while, and the results were poor, and that's why she can't do it anymore. And hopefully she'll come up with something new.
But she did. She's coming up with her own thing now, separate and apart from Columbia. Right. Who knows who's going to buy into that, but she's not going away so quickly.
Okay, so worst case scenario, what could the worst case scenario be in this case, and what would that look like?
Well, the worst case scenario is that the court agrees with Reading Recovery.
And then what happens?
And says that the legislature overstepped its bounds by and look, they basically Reading Recovery is saying they tricked us. They put this in a huge funding bill,
right?
And nobody knew it was there. And then once it got passed, then everybody started looking at it, and then of course it was too late. And look, reading recovery, you could bet if that happened through the regular legislative process, reading recovery would have their lobbyists going up there and saying, no, 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 you can't do that, trying to get individual legislators to not vote in favor of it. But for some reason, they were willing. I almost don't understand how they might have missed it. They without these guys have sophisticated lobbying operations, and for the exact purpose of reading these statutes and figuring out if it's going to do them any damage. I guess they just dropped the ball in Ohio and Louisiana and Virginia and whatever the other state was, and it's going to keep happening. Mississippi's doing something different too, and their scores have dramatically improved. But the funny thing about those states, Louisiana, all those southern states, the scores are so low. So almost any improvement's going to look great. But being able to sustain it over the long haul when you don't properly fund education generally in your state is going to be a hard thing for them to continue.
That's an interesting point. That's very interesting because they were starting out. Some of those states, Mississippi was starting out at a very low point. So anytime you're going to try something different, there's a very good chance it'll go up from there when you already you're at a low point. John, I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, during No Child Left Behind, Reading First, when reading recovery was not on the approved list?
Yeah.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about that? Because, there are a lot of younger people listening and they probably don't know that background. You and I remember it. Judy, I know I've spoken to you about it. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like history repeats itself. So
unfortunately, that's true. Well, look, at some point, reading recovery had to start. So they're not going to be on the approved list in the beginning. They'd have to pass muster. But again, if you fund your lobby firm well, you're going to be able to get stuff done. And lobbying goes on not just at the assembly or the Senate level in New York, anyway, whatever they call it in Ohio, it's the same thing. It also is, the state education department goes to conventions that these publishers have. If you go, for instance, New York State School Boards Association is having their weekend, their long weekend starting tomorrow in Buffalo. And when you go to one of these conventions, a whole floor of vendors is set up so that you could go and see all the vendors and talk to them about whatever it is they're trying to sell. Bring that back to your school board for discussion, and then and decide, maybe you want to look further into something or not. So they get to do that, and then you have all these leaders all in one spot where all of these people can meet with these leaders and talk to them. And what they do is they have parties that you go to as board members or administrators. Some administrators go to this meeting as well, and there's other meetings besides school boards.
So wined and dined.
Yeah,
right? Wined and dined, and I remember that with publishers from years ago, that there would be all these perks. I'm not going to name any right now, but I remember I was working on Long Island in a BOCES, and the publishing reps would come, and there were all sorts of perks to buy into certain programs. And you have to wonder what was going on. And I actually knew somebody who got a trip to Brazil.
What?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And other trips paid for. And she was part of promoting this particular program.
So
So,
it was
yeah.
basically like sales.
Well, this happens with medical sales too.
No, I know, and
A lot of doctors get wined and dined by pharmaceutical companies. At
yeah,
least they did at one point. So this
it
happens
makes
all
sense
the
to
time.
me. It makes sense to me. Like a couple of years ago, probably, even when I was in a program that was aligned with the science and research, we would still be invited to these vendor fairs in Manhattan. And we would go, and I'm telling you, there was everything there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was everything. And you get the little prizes and the free giveaways. And, it wasn't all aligned to the science, even though that's where, my heart lied. There was everything under the sun there. And
Yeah.
a lot of it probably wasn't the best for students. And it's unfortunate. It is big business. Now, what happens if, we all know the science, we all know the research. Do you foresee that there's going to be cases for years and years if the data doesn't move fast enough? If what's going to happen? What is the next 30 years going to look like?
No, I think they've already got enough data to support science of reading.
Good.
It's just naturally reading and recovery is saying there is no data, but obviously there is. And there was enough data for a governor of a state to put that directly in his budget
Exactly.
without without hesitation. And then the legislature also kept it in the budget because they didn't have to do that. They just said, you know what, DeWine, take this out. They didn't do that. They kept it in because the numbers that they're producing now, what do they have to lose? They might as well, even if science and reading is complete poppycock, they might as well give it a shot because sticking with what they're doing just isn't going. It's not working. So why else would they do it? If it was working, they'd keep it. And
So
that's why
John, when can we start celebrating that things are finally going in a good direction? Does this put us
they
on our
already are. And you could celebrate. The first celebration was when New York City kicked Lucy and Columbia out.
And
So
I'll drink to that.
I'll drink to it too.
bullshit ended?
So and I think what you're going to do is you're going to see.
You don't know our bullshit button, John?
You didn't warn him. You didn't warn him.
So yeah, so I don't think that that lawsuit's going to be successful, and there might be others, but as they start losing these cases, you're going to see the other cases just go away. And if it happens in multiple states, and I think there's a shot that that's going to happen because there's a lot of money involved. But these guys got their contracts by lobbying, not by litigating. And they're not going to be successful litigating. They're going to have to go back to the drawing board, come up with a different program, and then go back to lobbying in order to get, look, they're unhappy because they're about to lose a lot of money. But they could just go back to the drawing board. And if they don't, somebody else is going to.
So wait a minute. I just have one thought.
Yeah.
Ohio State University. So, obviously it seems like there is this incestuous relationship between Ohio State and the Board of Education and what the programs they use. It seems like there is this relationship there. What's the story with Ohio State? They obviously got a lot of money from Pinnell, a nice big, I think it was 9 million in all. I think 7.5 million at one point, a gift, then another 1.5 million. So what's their reputation going to be like?
Well, they still have to, how do you explain 40%? You can't, and Ohio State's probably in the same boat that Columbia's in.
That's what I'm thinking. That's exactly what I'm thinking. They're in the same boat.
And they have to decide, if they're going to cut their losses or if they're going to fight it out. I
Oh,
don't think
that's interesting.
I don't
Wow.
see why Ohio State would even get involved. If I was them, I'd be very low key. Yes, it's nice to get a $9 million donation, but in this situation, maybe that's 9 million that you don't really need, in terms of the bad will that's going to come with it.
Faith, can I say something that I think maybe you won't agree with?
I don't care. There's a lot of things I don't agree.
That's true too. So I think a lot of it probably is money, but I also think it's an over-attachment to beliefs. I really, really think that there's an over-attachment to beliefs. I think there's still people that really believe that's what was best for students despite the research.
Well,
I think it's over-attachment to a belief system rather than the research.
but there's also people that don't believe in the testing either. Obviously there's people who want to opt out of state testing. But in my opinion, the only reason that you have an opt-out movement for state testing is because they connected the testing to teacher performance. And once you did that, you almost guaranteed that the teachers were going to be against it. And then once you have the teachers against it as a cohesive group, well, you're not going to be successful because they're in every classroom, in every school, in every state. So if the teachers are against what you're doing, it's probably a pretty good sign that whatever you're trying to do is not going to work. And look, the public school system's got a lot of problems now, and it's not just reading. You've got this charter school movement and vouchers that people are trying to move away from the public school system because 40%. How do you justify sending your kids to a?
It's not producing. It's not producing. And
when you guys say 40%, can you be a little bit more clear exactly what your the point?
Well, the statistics are that around 40% of the students in the country are not reading at grade level. That's a pretty high percentage. Now, some districts are not going to have that because they got money or they provide appropriate reading instruction to their students. But I'm guessing most of them don't, and they use Fountas and Pinnell and they use Lucy's program and reading recovery. There was Read 180 is a program that it was debunked long ago, and some districts are still using it. So it's just, and this is not. I don't think it's a belief system or that they believe in these programs. I think it has more to do with not wanting to change. When the devil is better than the devil you don't. That type of rationale more than a belief system in a certain thing. Because how can you believe in a reading system that produces 40% failure? That's really, that's really something that's going to be hard to justify. You could delude yourself in maybe, but I don't think
I think a lot of it is just cognitive laziness. Just like you said, they know what they know. And although they're hearing these things, it's so hard to think of changing. Change is hard. And so rather than kind of say, all right, this is what we have to do. I mean, I'm working with a district now, and they're putting in the work to make all the changes and doing their best and really thinking about kids.
That's the same thing in my school where I'm working right now.
Okay.
We are embracing the science and we're moving full speed ahead. Very strategic.
But that is unusual. That's I think what John is saying, that people, it's not necessarily a belief, but it's this kind of being uncomfortable about changing and putting in all this work that they have to do, and people back off. That's what I think.
I think that's the really sad part, because I think, like I've said in many episodes, there were so many good things. There were a lot of good things, and I'm not going to get into that today. But, you know, if there was that reflection and there was that looking at the science, things could look a lot differently, you know? Like Steve Dykstra just said on our last episode, you know, one-on-one instruction can be the most powerful thing in the world when you're sitting with a kid. And had they really recognized the things that needed to shift and quickly spoken about it and embraced the science and said, listen, we have to change, not because cha-cha-ching dollar signs, but because they really, you know, took the time to, you know, look at the research, try something new, things could have looked very differently. So I think, what is the saying? They went down a rabbit hole and it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
I don't
And,
know what the feeling about.
I also, Judy, I love that you brought up the Steve Dykstra episode. So if anybody missed that episode was what brought us here with John McGrath. So that conversation with Steve Dykstra, if you missed it, please, it's right before this one, and that will tie in everything that we're talking about. I'm glad you mentioned that. John, any last thoughts you have
I
before
do.
we wrap up?
Yeah, I do. Now, the difference between Lucy's program and reading recovery and science of reading is a very basic one. Lucy's program was top down. Science of reading has been bottom up. Parents have been pushing for this. And Western New York has been a leader in developing this movement, the science of reading movement, not to mention Facebook groups and all of that. So it's really, it's a bottom up movement to change this. And that's the other reason why Heinemann's lawsuit and Reading Recovery's lawsuit is going to fail, because this is bottom up. Parents are sick of having their kids fail, not know how to read, not be able to get a good job. They're sick of it, and they're finally organizing. The only thing that's shocking to me is why it took so long.
And I would agree, but I think things are changing, and I'm glad you gave a shout out to Western New York, because they are a great group of parents, and they are doing the hard work getting out there. So good for them. So, all right, Judy, is there anything we missed before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to John. You know, one of the main reasons we wanted to have you here is our viewers online. They said, we want to hear from the lawyer. We got a lawyer on. We jumped on it. So thank you so much for giving us, you know, the skinny on the legal front. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we can't wait to release this and see what our viewers think. Thank you.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I thank both of you for inviting me.
Thank you, John. It's been really great. And for those of you listening, we have some great things coming up. There's going to be a writing series that we're doing. We started it already. And now we're going to present some research, up-to-date research about
news.
Yeah, breaking news in writing. So that's coming up for the month of November. So we hope you tune in. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Wait, what's that?
One last drink to Lucy. Here we go.
And let me say my goodbyes, and follow us on our newly designed Instagram page, The Literacy View. Follow us on Instagram, Boxner Damsky. Follow Faith also at High Five Literacy. Follow us on Twitter at Boxner Judy. Follow Faith on Twitter at Faith Burkowski. And also follow us on Facebook, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. You could find us on all Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as YouTube if you prefer to watch us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night.